and they just wake them up, go, how could you do this? How could you be sleeping in the midst of our storm? And how many of us understand that? How many of us feel that pain? Maybe right now you're going through the season of pain and you can't understand how this God who said he would protect you would fall asleep in the stern. And so let me give you 4 sort of thoughts that focus our discussion on this. Here's the first one. It is easier to assume that God has forgotten me than to recognize the truth that it is God who led me into the storm. I've always found this to be very perplexing. It was no accident that the disciples entered into this boat and made it into Galilee, the sea, in the middle of the storm. It was, in fact, by the suggestion of Jesus. And that was not the only time that Jesus would lead them straight into the mouth of the lion, so to speak. And I found in my life that those are some of the most challenging times in my life where I feel like I've prayed, I've asked God for his blessing, I've done my part, and then I've seen myself enter into a storm and wondered, how? Did I mishear God? Has God led me astray? Why is he sleeping when it looks like he was the very one who suggested that I go into the storm? And so it is very easier in the flesh naturally for us to assume that God has just forgotten us, because the other side of that coin is to recognize the reality, the truth, that God has actually invited us into the storm. We don't think of it as an invitation, do we? And yet if God has led us into the storm, then I think the reality is that he must have a purpose in it. And we'll see in the verses that I read you the purpose that God has in it. And if God is silent in the middle of the storm, listen, it's not because he has nothing to say. We're living in a culture where everybody's driven to speak, say, so that we are under this impression that if somebody's not saying anything, that means they have nothing to say. And yet it is the very silence of God that is meant to be instructive here and is meant to change something in the foundation. In fact, much of the deconstruction that has been happening in the Christian faith, many of the people who go through this season, myself, as I went through the season of questioning God when I found myself in the storm, has been sort of this process of stopping and leaning into the silence of God and wondering, God, if you're silent, is there a reason, or are you really not there? And I found that, just like the disciples would soon learn, that his very silence is not a sign of his absence, but in fact is making a bigger point about the reality of who he is. And we'll see that in just a second.